Hello and welcome. Yes, it's been a while. This was meant to be Tuesday's video. But yeah, we're doing more state government and officials 2025-2026. Today for this video, we are looking at the state of Kansas. I mean, almost directly center of the nation. So, yeah. I believe the capital is Topeka. I know that's where the government seat is held. State government is based in Topeka, Kansas. Capital city of Kansas, yeah, so. With that, let's start off first by looking at the Constitution of Kansas, also known as the Wyandotte Constitution. It was amended many times, including a universal suffrage amendment in 1912, but it's still the Constitution of Kansas, so likely the only Constitution Kansas has had. Like I said, some states remake theirs multiple times, some not really, no. So, Kansas Territory itself was created in 1854, 7 years before the American Civil War. I was about to call it the Revolution. I was like, no, that's not right. But yeah, with Kansas being a territory, there was a lot of controversy with slavery. In fact, the attempts of people who were anti-slavery and people pro-slavery moving in and clashing with one another's earned it the name of Bloody Kansas or Bleeding Kansas. So yeah, famously, John Brown was there fighting to try to make Kansas a free state. And it would eventually lead to him moving east for the attack on Harper's Ferry in what was then Virginia, is now West Virginia. But yeah. But there was a number of constitutions. Attempted drafts of the Constitution, we'll say. Because, of course, people wanted slave state, but people also wanted non-slave state, because Kansas was a tipping point in the balance. There were 3 other constitutions besides the Wyandotte Constitution: the Topeka Constitution, the Leavenworth Constitution, and the Lecompton Constitution. Voting took place in a climate of intimidation and open fear. The Lecompton Constitution was voted to be the Constitution of Kansas and would have made Kansas a slave state. All that was left to do was send it to D.C., but after a rigorous national debate over the topic, it was overruled and the people of Kansas were set to vote on the 4 constitutions again. The Wyandotte Constitution was approved in a referendum by a vote of 10,421 to 5,530 on October the 4th, 1859. And in April of 1860, the U.S. House of Representatives voted 134 to 73 to admit Kansas under the Wyandotte Constitution. Though apparently there's still resistance from the Senate. As 11 slave states seceded from the Union, their senators left their seats. And on January 21st, 1861, the Senate passed the Kansas Bill. The admission of Kansas as a free state became effective January 29th, 1861. So, while a lot of people don't think of Kansas, it has, especially at that moment before the bubble pop that signaled the Civil War, it held an important part in history at that point. The Constitution of Kansas settled the terms of Kansas's admission, particularly establishing that it would be a free state, and it represented a pragmatic compromise over hotly contested issues. It rejected slavery and affirmed separate property rights for married women and their right in school to participate in school elections, but denied universal suffrage for women, blacks, and Indians, or Native Americans. So yeah, women could have their own separate property and could vote in school elections, but they couldn't vote in other elections to elect representatives and stuff nationally, statewide, and more likely countywide, regionally. But they were given a level of autonomy. So it was pretty interesting. Sloan O. Thatcher of Lawrence, Kansas, gave a rousing speech opposing the exclusion of African Americans from Kansas. The motion to exclude them was subsequently defeated, despite the fact that previously all the Democrats and a few of the Republicans favored the exclusion. Remember, at this point, the political ideologies are reversed. At this time, Democrats were the pro-slavery, Republicans anti-slavery. So, yeah. Another issue delegates considered was that of women's rights. Clarina Nichols, social activist and associated editor in Keendaro Shindawan, an abolitionist newspaper, was asked to address the convention. As a result of their efforts, women gained the rights to own property and to participate in school district elections, and the Constitution assured the state would provide the women's equal rights in the possession of their children. So, while you don't often think of Kansas nowadays as being this groundbreaker, in its early days, in its early roots, It absolutely was. But yeah, that's a look at the Constitution of Kansas. So they originally could have entered as a slave state, but that was rejected, and they voting again, they entered as a free state. So yeah. Now, with that said, let's look at the government of Kansas. Very much like the other states, and it is very much similar to the U.S. federal government model. Three branches: executive, legislature, and judicial, the three-legged stool of government, as it's called here in the U.S. The use of checks and balances, which is now ignored because of an evil fuck in our presidency, and people that would bend over and allow him to do whatever he wanted. Because they're like, yes, sir, I like being potentially next in line. Instead of having actual spines and standing up to his evil and BS. But yeah. The governor has a degree of direct executive power, but must share executive power with other statewide elected officials. The lieutenant governor serves as the first in line successor to the governorship if a vacancy occurs. Legislature comprises the House of Representatives and the Senate, passes statutes, votes on the budget, and controls the action of the executive through oversight and the power of impeachment. The power of the Kansas Senate president of the Kansas Senate presides over the Senate, and the Speaker of the House presides over the House of Representatives. Both officers are in line behind the Lieutenant Governor to succeed in the governorship in the event of a vacancy. Independent judiciary based on common law system, which evolved from use in the British Empire and is divided into two courts of last resort, as we often see: a Supreme Court, which deals with civil law, and a Court of Appeals dealing with criminal law. The Court of Impeachment monitors the activities of all statewide elected officials, including court justices of the Supreme Court. The people of the state reserve the right to directly participate in the government by referendum, recall, and ratification. So they do have a modicum of control in the way some laws go. I think, as a matter of fact, Kansas was one of the states that guaranteed the right to abortion when all these states were trying to kick it to the curb, because Trump basically said, nah, we'll let the assholes in the states do what the fuck they want because I'm an asshole myself. So, you know. Anyway, executive branch: governor, lieutenant governor, and your elected officials in the executive branch. Your governor is Laura Kelly. Your lieutenant governor, David Tolland. Your attorney general, Chris Kobach. Your secretary of state, Scott Schwab. Your state treasurer, Stephen Johnson. and your insurance commissioner, Vicki Schmidt. Let's see, what else? List of governors for Kansas. Of course, like I said, your most current one, and they just came into office January 19th, 2019, so elected in late 2018. But yeah. As a territory, it had Andrew Horatio Reeder as governor, appointed by Franklin Pierce. Wilson Shannon as governor, appointed by Franklin Pierce. John W. Geary, appointed by Franklin Pierce. Robert J. Walker, appointed by James Buchanan. And James W. Denver, appointed by James Buchanan. And finally, as a territory, Samuel Metairie, appointed by James Buchanan. As an official state, the first official governor voted in was Charles L. Robinson. He was followed by Thomas Garney, then Samuel J. Crawford, Nehemiah Green, James M. Harvey, Thomas A. Osborne, George T. Anthony, John St. John, George Washington Glick, and finally John Martin at number 10. So those are the early governors of the state and territory of Kansas. Let's also look at the state offices. Laura Kelly as your governor, David Tolland as your lieutenant governor, Scott Schwab as Secretary of State, Stephen Johnson as your treasurer, Chris Kobach as Attorney General, and your insurance commissioner, Vicki Schmidt. So yeah, those are, again, the same positions elected by the people for the executive branch. Now with that, let's see. The legislature, the courts. There we go. The executive branch agencies, essentially your cabinet, and external cabinet agencies. The agencies in your cabinet is the Adjutant General, who runs emergency management and the Kansas National Guard. The Administration Agency, Aging and Disability Services, Agriculture, Children's and Families, Commerce, Corrections, Health and Environment, Information Technology Services, Kansas Highway Patrol, Labor, Revenue, Tourism, Transportation, Veteran Services, Wildlife, and Parks. Those are your cabinet agencies. Now you have external non-cabinet agencies. Abstractors Board of Examiners, the Board of Accountancy, Office of Administrative Hearings, African American Affairs Commission, Bank Commissioner, or Office of State Bank Commissioner, Board of Barbering, Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, Division of Child Advocate, Citizens Utility Taxpayer Board, Corporation Commission, Board of Cosmetology, Department of Credit Unions, Dental Board, Disability Commission on Disability Concerns, Emergency Medical Services, Governmental Ethics Commission, Kansas State Fair Board, Fire Marshal, Kansas Governor Grants Program, State Board of Healing Arts, Board of Examiners Fitting Dispensing of Hearing Instruments, Hispanic and Latino American Affairs Commission, the Kansas Historical Society, the Kansas Human Rights Commission, the Indigents Defense Services State Board, CanCare Ombudsman Office, Kansas Public Employees Retirement System, Long-Term Care Ombudsman, the Kansas Lottery, Board of Mortuary Arts, Office of Native American Affairs, Board of Nursing, Kansas Optometry Board of Examiners, Kansas Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training, Board of Pharmacy, Kansas Racing and Gaming Commission, the Real Estate Appraisal Board, Real Estate Commission, Kansas Sentencing Commission, State Gaming Agency, State Library of Kansas, Board of Tax Appeals, State Board of Technical Professions, Board of Veterinary Examiners, and the Kansas Water Office. Now, let's go ahead and dig a little bit further into the groups here. While the governor normally may not enact legislation, he may not create laws, as it's supposed to be the same with the U.S. government. The president shouldn't be able to create laws, but he's using these executive orders like they are. However, the governor can be empowered to do so by the legislation, thus being able to issue executive orders which are binding throughout the state. Okay, Lieutenant Governor. Apparently, the Lieutenant Governor must be elected separately from governor. Some states do them as running mates, some do them separately. But the way they seem to be talking about the Lieutenant Governor here, it just gives me the feeling that they're elected separately. However, let's dig into the legislative branch. Legislative branch consists of two chambers: Senate, House of Representatives. Most important of the powers of the legislature are the powers to levy and collect taxes, borrow money, and raise and maintain the militia of the state. The Constitution grants the legislature the authority to legislate on all rightful subjects of legislation. The legislature meets normally once a year, beginning in January, which will usually last for a period of 90 days. Under special circumstances, the governor can call special sessions into action. The governor has strong influence in shaping the agenda of the legislature. Acts of the legislature must be approved by majority in both houses and signed by the governor to be enacted into law. However, the governor can veto the bill. The legislature is able, by a 2/3 vote in both houses, may be able to overturn the governor's veto, and the bill will be enacted into law without the governor's signature. But on appropriations bills, the governor has a line item veto. I mean, there's certain parts he can pull out and say, not this. The rest of it's fine, but this is going. Or this is changing. Senate is the upper house of the legislature. In Kansas, the lieutenant governor does not preside over the Senate. Rather, the Senate elects its own president. And that individual is third in line to succeed the governor. So governor, lieutenant governor, might be someone before, or it might be, like I'm thinking, governor, lieutenant governor, then your Senate president, because it said the Kansas House of Representatives Speaker is fourth in line. So that's interesting. Senators serve a staggered 4-year term. So 2 years, half is elected. The next 2 years, the other half. The House of Representatives do 2-year terms. So every 2 years, new set of representatives is elected. So yeah. Let's see what else we can find out by going to the legislature. As we've already mentioned, bicameral. Your current president of the Senate, Ty Masterson, and your current Speaker of the House, Dan Hawkins, for Kansas's legislature. There is 40 members who sit in the Senate and 125 in the House. Very heavily Republican right now. Of the 40 people in the Senate, 31 are Republican and 9 are Democrat. While in the House of Representatives, the 125 members, 88 are Republican and 37 Democrat. Okay. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, Bloody Kansas or Bleeding Kansas. Very, very violent affair where the idea of Kansas entering as either a slave state or non-slave state was fought over so heavily. Let's see, what else? We got it all here. The 20s were a very common era for the Klan. They were in a lot of states. But there was a number of legal battles apparently in Kansas between the state and the Klan, which resulted in their expulsion from the state. Uh, what else have we got going on? Okay, that's a look at the legislature. Finally, let's look at the judicial branch. They don't talk a whole lot about the different courts in the judicial branch. They talk a lot about the Supreme Court. There's mention of other courts, but it don't say a whole lot. But that's why I went ahead and pulled this up. Courts of Kansas. And as we have already mentioned, you have the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals. Kansas is split into 31 districts for the district courts. There is also municipal courts, your city, town courts. But yeah, those are the ones they list there. Let's see. The judicial system of Kansas is the branch of the Kansas state government that interprets the state laws and constitution, much like the federal Supreme Court is meant to interpret laws and the Constitution. It is headed by the Kansas Supreme Court, which is one of two courts of last resort. And it is courts of general jurisdiction and limited jurisdiction. Also, the Kansas judiciary contains two independent courts. All judges and justices requiring appointment are appointed by the governor. Candidates must first go through a nominating process through the Kansas Judicial Nominating Commission, which selects 3 candidates to submit to the governor for a single selection to the office. So we've seen things like this similarly in other states where they're like, here's your list to kind of pick from. And the governor will usually pick one out. Your Kansas Supreme Court consists of a Chief Justice and 7 Associate Justices who are appointed by the governor from a list of 3 judges submitted by the Judicial Commission. Justices are also ratified by the electorate at the next election following their appointment and at the end of each 6-year term. Justices serve until they resign or fail to be retained in office. The Supreme Court's decisions are binding on all lower state courts. This is kind of interesting. They've got a Chief Justice, but 7 Associate Justices. Usually you want an odd number, so there is no ties in decisions. But if you have 8, then it don't really matter, I guess. Yeah. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction and has general superintendent control over all inferior courts in the judiciary, as well as all agencies, commissions, and boards exercising power under the Constitution. The court has appellate jurisdictions coextensive with that of the state's borders on all cases at law and in equity except criminal cases, in which the Court of Criminal Appeals has exclusive appellate jurisdiction, meaning any appealed cases must go there as a last resort. If any event there is any conflict in determining which court has jurisdiction, the Supreme Court is granted the power to determine which court has the jurisdiction with no appeal from the court's determination. So the Supreme Court can say, yeah, we'll take it, or no, it's got to go to them. They hear oral arguments every year. The Supreme Court supervises the lower courts through the administrative office of the courts and also supervises Kansas's legal profession through the Kansas Bar Association. All lawyer admissions and disbarments are done through recommendations of the association, which are then routinely ratified by the Supreme Court. The association has 6,900 members, including lawyers, judges, law students, and paralegals. 4 of the 7 justices are required to affirm, modify, or overturn any ruling of any lower court. So, you could say, yeah, I completely agree, or slight change, but for the most part. Or say, no, it's wrong. Once the court has reached a decision, one justice is selected to write the court's opinion, and once published, it becomes a controlling factor in the state's law surrounding the issue or issues it addresses. Stare decisis. Kansas Constitution designates that the justice who has served the longest continuous term of service on the court will serve as the Chief Justice. Okay, so is it just that they've got 7 Chief Justices, one of them? Because it said Chief Justice and 7 Associate Justices, acting like they're 8. But is it 7 justices and one of them just so happens to be Chief Justice? Chief Justice of Kansas is responsible for the administration of all courts in the Kansas judiciary and establishes rules for all courts to follow. The Chief Justice also oversees all practicing attorneys in the state. So yeah, a look at the Kansas judiciary system. There's a Wikipedia article to go a little more in depth for the Supreme Court. But it looks like it's a lot of the same things. Eligibility requirements. Must be at least 30 years old. No maximum age though, so 30 up. and then a lawyer admitted to practice in Kansas and engaged in the practice of law for at least 10 years, whether as a judge, lawyer, or full-time teacher at an accredited law school. So that's what it takes to be on the Supreme Court, I'm guessing. So interesting. Your current justices on the Kansas Supreme Court: Maria Luckert, who currently serves as Chief Justice; Eric S. Rosen; Daniel Biles; Caleb Stegall; KJ Wall; Melissa Stanbridge; and Larkin Walsh. So yeah, looks like it's supposed to be just 7. One of them is Chief Justice. Yeah, the way they had that phrased confused me in the other article there, because it made it seem as if it was 8 instead of 7, so. Infamous or notable cases in Kansas. But yeah, that's a look at Kansas, its government, and the officials. But we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.